underdeveloped countries to have to suffer the consequences of climate change when they contribute the very least amount of carbon emissions?
I don't believe they're suffering from the consequences yet, but giving money towards adaptation would be like a healthcare team going into a country with Band-Aids and Neosporin and not a vaccine to go ahead and prevent the disease.
Scientists believe that global warming may melt many polar ice caps, causing sea levels to rise and coastal areas to shrink. Without help from undeveloped countries, ports and farmland would be swamped and overtaken by the sea, crippling already struggling economies. Should we not try to help these countries prepare for that to happen?
Well, we could spend a lot of money moving people from the coastline in and trying to go ahead and prepare for that. Or we could spend a lot of money fighting climate change so that it's never a problem, these lands never flood, and we don't have to spend money on it.
Wouldn't you agree at this point that some climate change consequences are unavoidable?
Well, yes, there's always unavoidable consequences to climate change, but there are also very many that we could actually avoid through mitigation.
Well, if we know that some are unavoidable, should we adapt for them and also help those developing countries, because we know that we are part of the main cause as industrial developed countries?
Well, let me answer that with 2 remarks. First of all, we don't know if developed nations are to blame for global warming. And second of all, we are to mitigate before we adapt, because if we can mitigate in the first place, we won't have to adapt in the future.
Well, I mean, that's all fine for the developed industrial world, but think about the developing countries in short term, because they're going to have problems with vegetation due to climate change and things like shorelines being cutting off major ports, because, think about a hut of a family of 12 and they're being supported off of whatever farming they have, and that vegetation could really hurt them, and it could also hurt the economies due to major ports being cut off and rising sea levels.
Well, we have to think about practical solutions. There's always going to be a poverty-stricken population, and that's a totally different subject. And I know that they would be affected by climate change, but we need to practice mitigation before adaptation, and they would prosper under mitigation over adaptation.
The proposition states that Annex 1 countries will have to provide significantly increased aid. In this strained economy, we don't really have the option to do that. We can't provide for both adaptation and mitigation. So why would adaptation be more effective?
We've been trying to mitigate climate change for years to no avail. Adaptation is real world preparedness.
You guys support mitigating over adaptation, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Isn't it true, like I say in my constructive, that if we mitigate now, we won't have to adapt in the future?
Well, that's not necessarily true. We're already suffering some of the climate change consequences.
Can you list some examples?
Well, one that we all know for sure is the rising sea levels. That's an obvious thing that everyone throughout knows, and that really can cause a problem. It can cause a lot of economic disruption, and also jet streams being pushed down, causing a lot of climate change, temperature changes, which could really hurt things, like vegetation. And people who are already in struggle just don't need any of that.
Well, this may be true, but it is also part of the global warming theory, and that doesn't have as much scientific backing to make it an actual fact. It's still a theory, and it's just that.
Yes, but it is a theory, and if people are behind it, it is something that we do need to look after, because what if we don't support it and it happens?
That's true.
Do you have any further questions?